at least in the Hoover app, is for me. The live stream link is showing. If you have a problem, please, Kayla is going to be acting as support in the back end for that. Kayla is our education coordinator. Please send her a message. Your chats for participation, everyone that's here in person, I'm assuming that you're already participating. For those of you that are online, your chats and your questions to the speaker must be posted, and engagement must be posted through Hoover. That is how Hoover tracks. I want to just really quickly tell y'all, for those of you who are new to this and who don't like Hoover, why I like Hoover is Hoover tells me how long you're actually watching our video streams for. Hoover tells me if you've engaged. Hoover tells me how long you spend in each section. And I need that because when I report out to the state and I ask for stipend money and I ask for money for these books, the books that we get, the entirety of what the state gives, so I'm asking them for like $60,000. So they are very particular about how I get that money. So I have to prove that you engaged in all the sessions, and Hoover allows me to do that. And it's kind of hard to look all over the place. But as far as the video and the sound is going, that is all just through Zoom. That's embedded within the Hoover. That's as far as I'm going to go into that, but that is why I push your chats, and I've asked Kayla to be diligent about pushing you guys to your chats to taking place within Hoover, not in the Zoom. I know it's different and it's strange, but it keeps us from doing this asynchronously. And that is probably the next step, is actually shift this to an asynchronous model where we don't actually do things live and in person, which doesn't sound fun to me. And we just be recording. So everyone who's here, I really appreciate it. Everyone who is online, I'm so glad you're all here. Please, I want you to join us, be engaged. I am going to introduce our speaker today because we have a packed morning. And a lot of things going on. I'll try to keep everything running in the back end. If you have any questions, please engage today. It is my great pleasure to introduce Sheryl Silver Ochayon. She's a leading voice in Holocaust education and the project director for Echoes and Reflections at Yad Vashem's International School for Holocaust Studies. Sheryl brings a unique perspective as both a trained attorney and a seasoned educator, having spent nearly 2 decades helping teachers around the world bring history and lessons to the Holocaust in their classrooms with clarity, compassion, and depth. Her work has helped shape how educators approach some of the most difficult and important material that they will ever teach, so please join me in welcoming Sheryl. And real quick, I'm gonna like fan out here for a second. So every day, one thing that I insisted upon, we shifted when we have students who come here for our field trips. There's a great video on Yad Vashem that's it's called Echoes of the Life Before, or Glimpses of the Life Before, Glimpses of Life Before. And it's a really great little 5-minute video that introduces you to voices before the Holocaust, of individual diary entries. And Sheryl does this wonderful introduction, this great piece, and it's such a great introduction of the Holocaust. It shows you, the power of what was lost. It shows you that, and she says so beautifully, how can you understand the tragedy that was the Holocaust if you can't understand what was lost? And most of us don't start teaching the Holocaust that way. We teach it by jumping right into the camps. So I hope that you'll get a lot out of today and enjoy everything she has to say, and please engage and have a wonderful session.
Thanks, Stephen. That was a really, really warm, nice introduction. Thank you very much. Although it was a little shocking to hear that I've been doing this for almost 2 decades. I didn't realize that I've been doing it for that long. Okay, so it's really, really nice to be with you guys today, and everybody online too, out there in the universe. The first thing that we need to do, and this is just for Echoes and Reflections purposes, if you would not mind signing in, that way we can keep in touch with you, and we know who all we're dealing with here. So we'll sign in, we have a sign in, and we'll also do evaluations at the end of the sessions, because that's also something that Echoes takes very seriously. As Stephen said, I am the project director for Echoes and Reflections at Yad Vashem. So I actually work out of Jerusalem. I flew in on Sunday, and boy, are my arms tired, right? I flew in on Sunday. Yesterday I was in Charlotte, North Carolina. Today I'm here. Tomorrow I'm in Greenville, Tennessee, and that's my life. It's like, yeah, when I come to the States, that's what I do. I think I'm getting a little too old for it, but that's a different issue. So sign in real quickly. It'll take you a couple of minutes, and I'll just jump in. The first few slides. Is there anybody here who uses Echoes and Reflections? Great. Wonderful. So you're all pros. That's terrific. Okay. So we're just going to cover a little bit of the Echoes stuff first. Echoes is a great program. I say that not because I'm part of it. I say that because it really is a great program. It's something that we work very hard on. Yep, this is definitely the presentation. So we're going to get into women in the Holocaust in just a minute. But let's do the Echoes stuff first. We are a partnership of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, USC Shoah Foundation, which is where Steven Spielberg had all his testimonies. If you remember, when Spielberg produced Schindler's List in 1993, what he realized was that if he didn't start recording all of these people who were witnesses, who were survivors of the Holocaust, it was all going to get lost. And so he took it upon himself to start recording them. And these days, they've got like 55,000 survivor testimonies. We use at least 150 of them on our website in sound bites, which makes it very easy to use in and Yad Vashem, which is Israel's official Holocaust Memorial Museum. We call it the World Holocaust Remembrance Center. This slide is incorrect because we've actually worked with more than 168,000 educators since 2005. We've been doing this for 20 years, but what we do is we are constantly updating, we are constantly adding, we're constantly doing that type of thing. So, I understand that yesterday you saw Heather and 999, and so you're already into this whole issue of women in the Holocaust. But I'm going to start you off actually before we even get there. These are the Echoes pedagogical principles, and I'm not going to go through them now just as a list, but you'll hear me using them, and I'll point them out as I'm using them. The most important one to me is teach the human story right here, because. And I know that Stephen believes in this philosophy too. If you're going to teach texts and dates and numbers and all of this stuff, your students they're not going to empathize, they're not going to connect with it. What you have to do is you have to show them faces. They have to hear voices. And that's always the most important thing. And I think that's what we're going to be doing a lot today. So we're just going to move forward, I think. This way? Okay. So here's the game plan for today, for this first session. The first question is it even legitimate to focus solely on women? This is a question, okay? Then we're going to get to, obviously, I believe that it is. Otherwise, I wouldn't be standing here and doing this presentation, right? And then we're going to talk about women in the ghettos and the camps, what they faced, how they dealt with it. And then we're going to also talk about multidisciplinary resources. So a lot of the resources that are in Echoes to teach the human story, dilemmas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm going to start with this beautiful picture. This is a picture of a woman in the Kutno ghetto. It was taken by Hitler's photographer, Hugo Jäger rather. And we don't know her name, and we don't know what became of her, although we can guess. Why am I using this picture? You guys tell me. What do you think? Yeah, please.
One, she's beautiful.
She is.
And two, she's looking directly at the camera.
Mm-hmm.
And her face appears to be suffused with joy.
Mm-hmm.
Like she doesn't look afraid. She doesn't look like she's been starved or malnourished or mistreated. She looks healthy and vibrant. So it's possible that you're using that as a contrast to lead into conditions in the ghettos. It's possible you're using it to create a connection with the audience because we don't know what happened to her. So it creates questions, curiosity, and mystery.
Mm-hmm.
But she's compelling. When you look at her, she is very compelling.
I like your description very much. Stephen, should I be giving the microphone to whoever is talking?
If you're going to talk, if I have a long answer, probably yes, and I'll see if I can get.
He always says really short.
Okay, and tell me your name. Sasha. Sasha, I liked what you said. Suffused with joy, compelling, beautiful. Absolutely, I like all of that stuff. And yeah, all those go into why I'm starting with her picture. Please, should I give you the microphone? Is it a long answer?
No, it's not. I think that
Deanna.
Unidentified is important because while we hear so many stories of survivors,
Mm-hmm.
there are so many stories we don't hear and will never hear
Right.
because we don't even know the humanity that was lost.
Right. Okay. So Deanna is saying, I'm just going to echo. Deanna is saying, we don't know all the humanity that was lost, and we know that we don't know who she is, what happened to her. So yeah, that's a great great insight. Please.
Was that photograph used purposely? Like we were still photographed yesterday where people were working and it's just nicely and healthy and this was taken.
This was just taken in the ghetto. It was taken in the Kupno ghetto. It was taken by Hugo Yeager, Hitler's photographer, and he just took a lot of pictures of people in the ghetto.
But she looks hard.
She does. We're
staged.
staged. Yeah, no, this is not a staged photo. I mean, I think that this is just a photo that he happened to take, and he took a lot of photos of Jews in this ghetto. I think the reason why I love this photo for the reasons that were mentioned by Deanna and by Sasha, it is very compelling. The fact that we don't know what happened to her does definitely create an air of mystery. But the photo is in color. Right? One of the things that we're used to seeing all the time is black and white photos of the Holocaust. So whenever you can use a color photograph, it creates a bridge, right? Automatically. It brings you in. It draws you in. This could be now. This could be now. And she is really a beautiful woman. So just kind of to get us into this mindset of these are the people that, as Stephen mentioned, who was lost. So this is one of those women who was lost. You know, you use your imagination, you take it wherever it goes. Did you want to say something?
Sure, yeah, it occurs to me that regardless of whether she survived or not, this woman was lost.
Yes.
Because this is clearly a before picture.
Yes.
And at 1939, this has to be pretty close after the German occupation because it's Poland, it's central Poland.
Right.
And so she may be believing that the future isn't going to be what it is, but she's going to be disabused of that notion by coming events.
Very quickly.
She's gone,
Yeah.
regardless of whether she survived or not.
I agree with you. I agree with you. And your name is?
Mitch.
Mitch. Ah, Mitch. How you doing? We never met in person. We've spoken we've communicated on the computer. Yeah. Okay. So all those reasons, great reasons. And with all of that in mind, let's get into it. Okay. And this is a great quote from Emanuel Ringelblum. Emanuel Ringelblum, right? Just basic information here, and this is context for you. Emanuel Ringelblum was the man, the historian, the social scientist, basically, who was the creator, the inspiration, the man who put together the Oneg Shabbos archive, or Oneg Shabbat, if you like to pronounce it the Hebrew way. Oneg Shabbos was the archive in the Warsaw Ghetto. Yes, are you guys familiar with this? I'll explain it. The archive in the Warsaw Ghetto, where he basically said, and he did a huge, and incredible, actually, not even a favor to us, but this incredible, breakthrough for us 80 years later, that we know so much about the Warsaw Ghetto has a lot to do with the fact that Emanuel Ringelblum started an archive. And he told everybody just write. And he collected things. He collected posters. He collected German documents. He collected pictures, photographs, artists' renderings. He gave out journals to children, and they wrote. So he's responsible for a lot of what we know about the Warsaw Ghetto. And he's writing now in 1942. Pay attention to the date, because that's important. And this is what he writes. He writes, "The future historian will have to dedicate an appropriate page to the Jewish woman in the war. She will take up an important page in Jewish history for her courage and steadfastness. Thanks to her, thousands of families have managed to surmount the terror of the times." Okay, now, he's 1942. The Oneg Shabbos was going to embark on a study of women. A whole study. They were all going to be writing about women during this period of time. Unfortunately, We know that in July of 1942, the Warsaw Ghetto undergoes the Great Deportation, beginning on July 22nd, the Great Deportation from the Warsaw Ghetto, with 300,000 of the almost 500,000 Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto are going to be taken to Treblinka and murdered there, right? So what is he talking about? How could these Jewish women have managed to surmount the terror of the times? What was it that Jewish women were doing? What do you think? Setting this up, what do you think? How are they managing? Why does history owe them this great debt? Why should we be dedicating an appropriate page to the Jewish woman? What could they possibly have done? Yeah. Okay. Okay, wonderful. Your name is? Betsy. So Betsy says they did their best to maintain for their families, for their children, to maintain, I'm going to use the word dignity. Also going to use the word, to maintain them also in the physical sense of the word. I think you're absolutely right, Betsy. Sasha.
They made like a new currency, and the currency is kindness. Yesterday we were talking in the 999 about how they would steal, but they would share a lot of what they stole in Canada. There's a really cool YouTube video by a survivor named Francine Kristoff, and she recounts how her mom gave her a piece of chocolate when she first entered the camp. And then she held on to it the whole time she was there. And there was another woman in the camp who was pregnant and was going through a really hard time having the baby. And so the mom encouraged Francine to give that chocolate to the mother in labor so the baby could have like a sweet taste of the world. And years and years and years later, that baby, who's now a young woman, went and found Christine and thanked her for the chocolate. So I want to build off what she said over there. I think women tried to maintain the straight facade, but I think they also dealt in kindness, and I think they found ways to find silver linings in absolute hell.
I love that. That's great. And thank you for the story. Thank you for the story. I'm going to look it up later because it's the first time I've heard it. So thank you. Yeah. Yeah, that's great.
A teacher showed it to me, and I like to keep it in my repertoire.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, thank you very much. All right, so let's see. Let's see what it was that women were doing. And this is a quote that I just happened to like. We did a Women in the Holocaust exhibition at Yad Vashem not so long ago, and this is a quote from that exhibition. Women in the Holocaust applied their minds to a place that deprived them of their minds, brought strength to a place where they had no strength. And in a place where they and their families had no right to live, they marched all the way to death and invested every additional moment of life with meaning. It is their stories we wish to tell and their voices to hear. So the role of women in the Holocaust, everything that has been said, absolutely accurate, and we're going to get into some stories. So, but first I have to ask you the question, how can we be focusing solely on women? I mean, is it legitimate? Is this something that we should be doing? Weren't all Holocaust victims Holocaust victims? Wasn't the Holocaust a crime that was directed against Jews because they were Jews regardless of their gender? Why should we focus on women specifically? What do you think? Is it legitimate? I see a lot of nodding. Yeah, please.
Here,
Okay.
just people, the folks online, they're feeling left out.
Because as a whole, in history, we focus on the men, and women are often moved to the side or moved to a lower position just because of what was going on in society at the time.
Yep.
So
Agreed.
the stories haven't been told.
I agree with you. I agree with you completely. Yeah. Anybody else want to pipe up? Yeah, go ahead. And your name was Heidi.
I was just going to say that the women's names weren't recorded like the men's were. So I think that that's something significant as well.
When you say the women's names weren't recorded,
Yesterday we were told that a lot of the women's names were not recorded as far as like when they were brought into the camps and when they passed away and so forth, and men were.
okay, interesting. Okay, we'll have to check that out. All right, great. But I'm gonna roll with that. And this is here, like this is the. Okay, That was the slide that I was supposed to show you, which I completely forgot was there.
Sheryl, I just some more focus on
Yeah.
one of our, he said, history, Stephen was talking about, it says during my master's work, history shown through different prisms. Women is one of those prisms to give perspective.
Terrific. Thank you. Whoever that was, thank you very much.
That was Mr. Frick.
Okay, Mr. Frick. Thank you very much. Yeah, please. Yes, that's true.
So if the goal of the Holocaust was to eliminate Jews, then the women should be focused on because they're the ones that pass on Jewish identity to children.
Okay, very interesting point that you're making. I agree with that too. And you'll see that will come up. Okay, so, for the first 40 years of Holocaust research, there was absolutely no focus on women. Jews were Jews, and Jews were, the way we saw it, the way historians saw it, was that the Nazi final solution was a total genocide. It was meant to deal with all Jews, didn't matter whether you were male or female. And the people who pushed back against research into this whole issue of gender were those people who said, no, this is going to distract. Everyone is targeted for annihilation, doesn't matter what their gender is, and focusing on gender is going to distract us from this whole systematic murder of the Jews. And it's going to trivialize the Holocaust. There was a lot of fear of this, believe it or not, taking you back to the 80s. There's a lot of fear of focusing just on gender, just on women. But the truth is that when you focus on women, it gives you nuance. You are seeing a lot of things, there are a lot of things that women were sensitive to that men were not sensitive to. There were a lot of ways that women were affected that men were not affected. Or putting it differently, women and men were affected in different ways by what they were going through. So just to give you some examples of nuanced understanding, right? And this is going back to what you said, and Tim, okay, what Tim said. The lives of Jewish women were endangered as women, as mothers, as caretakers, and as agents of fertility. So it is women who pass on their Jewishness to their children. The picture that I'm showing you here, the photo that I'm showing you, is one of those iconic photos during the Einsatzgruppen period. This is in Szeged, Latvia. This is really pretty much on the beach. Now look at the date of the photo. This is the middle of December, 1941. You're standing on the beach in the middle of December 1941. You know that it's freezing cold. Okay, that's point number one. Point number two, these are women who have been undressed. And one of the things that Yad Vashem does, and let me just for a second, Yad Vashem is a really weird name and people don't know what it means because it's Hebrew. It comes from the book of Isaiah. And in the book of Isaiah, there's a quote, "V'natati lachem beveiti u'bechomotai yad Vashem asher lo yikaret," which means, I will give you within my house and within my walls a memorial and a name that shall not be cut off. And one of the things that we try and do all the time is give these people back their faces and their names. So we kind of have a deal with Google where people can post pictures, and when people post pictures, we can try and identify them. So most of these women have been identified, most of them. And so what you see is Fruma there. She's the grandmom here. She's the maternal, thank you, the matriarch of the family. And you can see that she's standing probably with two of her daughters. One is identified, the one on her right is unidentified. But I want you to pay attention to Sheryl, who's over here. She's a child. And you can see that she can't even raise her face to look at the camera. And what does that tell you? What's happening here? What's happening in this picture? And this is one of those examples of the ways that the Holocaust and what happened during the Holocaust affected women differently than it affected men. Because men, if they're told to strip down to their underwear, it's not as big a deal. Remember that most of these women, especially in these areas, in the far east of Europe, Latvia, Lithuania, but even in Poland and in, all of those areas, most of these women are Orthodox women, meaning that they are modest. Modesty is one of those big virtues in Orthodox Judaism. They wear dresses and shirts that cover their arms, cover their legs. So what's happening here? Yeah, Tim. Humiliation, right. This is abject humiliation, absolutely, yeah.
I was gonna say, because it is, that modesty is such a part of that culture and that belief is, it's immediately stripping away part of that identity.
Beautiful. And your name is? Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. Absolutely. So it's humiliation, it's abject humiliation, and it's stripping away parts of their identity immediately. You're absolutely right. Yes, please.
What's striking me about this photo is the background, because they're
Yeah.
taking this photo, but we know exactly what's going to happen after this photo gets taken, and so then why, I don't know, it's bothering me.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's bothering you for the correct reason. We know what's about to happen to these women. We know. They may not yet.
Striking me about this one also is the fact that the child is slightly trying to hide herself behind, and mom matriarch has her head held as high as she possibly can in that situation.
I like that point, Betsy. And also, you can see how they have linked arms. So this is really even a show of strength, if you will, against this abject humiliation, against the stripping of their identity. They are a family, and they are clinging to each other as a family, and that is how they are standing. It's a great point. Yep. There were a couple more hands. Okay. All right, Sasha. Betsy got there first. Okay. All right. So the Holocaust also produced experiences that were unique to women. You take a look at a photo like this and different responses. Take a look at this photo. We have identified this woman. Her name is Fanny Chaim, and she was deported from Yanina in Greece. This is the moment that her mother was taken away. Look at her face. Look at the anguish. It's the moment that her mother was taken away. Now, I'm not going to be, I want to stay away from stereotypes. I don't know that a man might have a son might have the same type of anguish. I don't want to say he wouldn't, but I think it's much more, what's the word that I should use so that I can be PC here? Okay. With a woman, it would be more intense. It's a more instinctual. Betsy, you want to help me? Accepted? Okay. All right. I'll go for that. Yeah.
There's also an expectation at a certain age, and she's clearly like, a young woman, that you take care of your mother. Yes. And so you have to look at it from that perspective as well.
That's a great point, and we're going to get there. And your name is Marty. Thank you, Marty. Absolutely. The expectation that a young woman will take care of her mother. Okay, let me show you a little bit more. Unmarried young women in Germany in the mid-1930s stayed with their parents rather than emigrating or fleeing. When a woman, you hear these stories a lot in the Holocaust. A woman who has a son, what will she tell that son? Many times, and I have an example of it in the PowerPoint. What will she tell her son if she knows that great trouble is coming and she wants to save him? Go. Absolutely. Go. Save yourself. Go. And I have a slide in here somewhere with Yuri Kaplansky, who was a smuggler in the Warsaw Ghetto. And his mother basically pushed him out the window of their house and said, save yourself, because I can't save myself, but you can save yourself. But women, doesn't work that way. A mother will not necessarily say to her daughter, go, and the expectation is that she'll stay with her mother. So this is just a picture from the Platform 17 Memorial, which is in Berlin. And what you can see, they have, along the train tracks, they have all of the transports to Auschwitz from Berlin. And if you look at the records, you will see that it's mainly the last transports that came from Berlin and went to Auschwitz were mostly older women and their daughters, but mostly older women. So there's Marty is absolutely right. There's a different expectation when you talk about women, that they're going to take care of their mothers, right? Everybody agree with me? You can push back. Feel free to push back anytime. Yeah,
I just think that we should recognize that these are still individual choices. I have a personal family friend who was the oldest son in a family, and his parents wanted to send him away, and he went to the end of the street and he came back. He wouldn't leave his family, even though he was in a position in Poland where he could have fled into the Soviet Union, and almost certainly saved his life. He ended up surviving anyway, but I mean, through a great deal of trauma. But he was the only son out of, well, he was a little brother too, but the only son who had age enough to be able to flee and refused to do so. He just wouldn't. Whereas his older sister went to another city. So individual differences too.
Yeah, I hear you. There are always choices that are made, and I'm generalizing a lot here. And I apologize for that. Yeah, there are definitely individual choices. Wait, your name was Deanna.
Again, not to buy into stereotypes, but looking at my heritage, both Italian on one side, Jewish on the other, the men tend to take care of their families, but they think of it as financial, making sure you have a home, making sure you have things that you need and money that you need. With mothers, it's more feeding, healthcare, again, stereotypes, but it's just, my experience. So to say the men didn't take care of their families, they did. It's just a different kind of mentality.
Yep, I hear you. I agree. Okay, thank you, Deanna. Betsy.
So I'm actually just reading out, somebody said something interesting in the chat. Romario said, during those years, it was more difficult for women to be on their own than for men. There was a lack of opportunities, the misogyny, the stereotypes, all of the things that would have made it more difficult regardless for families to either let go or for the women to be strong enough to let go. Okay. And I think that's a valid point. So
Absolutely.
When they're saying stuff in here, I'm just letting you know.
Thank you, Betsy. I agree. It was more difficult for women to be on their own. And remember that we're talking about the 30s and 40s. We're not talking about today. Please.
Okay, hi. My parents were Holocaust survivors, and I was born in a displaced persons camp. So I had a conversation with Heather yesterday, and she reinforced what I was thought, that the family unit was extremely strong. And I saw this with my uncle. Even after he lost, through the Holocaust of bullets, our entire family, he went back to see whatever was left of that family unit. And I can't tell you the anguish of leaving your family was horrendous. Horrendous, whether you were a male or a female.
Valid point. Thank you very much for making it. And your name is?
Gail.
Gail. Thank you, Gail.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. We can't discount that. How difficult it was for anyone to leave their families. Absolutely. Okay. I think we've covered this one pretty well. And let's keep going. In a lot of situations, women were abandoned because we know, for instance, that during the Holocaust, at the beginning at least, the thinking was the Germans won't touch the women and the children. The men are the ones who have to escape. And you'll see that in a second also. I'll show you some graphs that will support this. For instance, this is the population of Warsaw. This is before the ghetto, and this is during the ghetto. And you can see already that the women are going to really outstrip the men. And that's because many of the men were taken away for labor. So women are left to deal with the situation by themselves, alone, and the men are just not there. So women had to deal with these situations a lot of times. Same thing in Łódź. You can see it's the same deal. This is before the war, and this is 1940 and 1942. So the women are really outstripping the men, which shows you that women had to deal with a lot of this stuff by themselves. If we're talking about the family, if we're talking about the healthcare, if we're talking about keeping everyone together, all of that was going to fall on the shoulders of the women. And we know also that in terms of family, many women chose death rather than abandoning their families. Women who were on the verge of selections, women who had to decide whether to go, whether to stay, exactly what to do, whether to volunteer. Well, okay, this is a story that comes to us from the Warsaw Ghetto, from Marek Edelman. Marek Edelman was one of the commanders of the Warsaw Ghetto fighters, and what he says is he tells this story. Paula Lifshitz went to her house and she saw that her mother wasn't there. Her mother was already in a column marching toward the Umschlagplatz, which is the deportation square in the Warsaw Ghetto. Paula ran after this column alone. She ran after this column from Leszno Street to Stavki. Her fiancé gave her a lift in his rickshaw so that she could catch up, and she made it. At the last minute, she managed to merge into the crowd so as to be able to get on the train with her mother. Everybody knows about Korczak, right? Do you guys know about Korczak? Janusz Korczak was an educator in the Warsaw Ghetto who went to his death with his children in his orphanage because he did not want to leave them. And everybody, I mean, that's the story. That's what we know about Korczak. If you know anything about Korczak, you know that he went to Treblinka with the orphans who were in his orphanage. A lot of people don't realize, and going back to what Stephen said in terms of who was this man, what was it that we lost? We lost an incredible educator. He was a man who believed that children had minds of their own, that children should be treated as adults, that children had preferences, that children had ideas, and that they were all worthy. So that's what we lost. So Marek Edelman says, everybody knows about Korczak, right? Korczak was a hero because he went to death with his children of his own free will. But Paula Lifshitz, who went with her mother, who knows about Paula Lifshitz? And Paula could have easily crossed to the Aryan side because she was young, pretty. She didn't look Jewish, and she'd have had 100 times better chance. So just one story about one woman. And again, as Mitch pointed out, these are all individual choices, but Paula made the choice not to be separated from her mother. And so she's going to run after her to the deportation square to catch her to be on the same train. Just one story. Okay. Yeah.
I just want to point out that the one thing that Marek Edelman was pointing out, although he didn't say it directly, was that somebody had to tell that story. That we wouldn't have known about Korczak if nobody told his story, even though he had an international reputation. But nobody would have known the woman's story either, except for that he told her story. So, I mean, he's putting our job in front of us and saying, tell these stories. Everyone we find out we should tell, then we don't have to say, who's ever heard of?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So he's making our lives easier by telling us what it is that we should be talking about. Okay, another nuanced feature about women. In many Eastern European households, women were the engines of acculturation. What do I mean by that? You can see from this photo, right? This is a photo of a cheder. A cheder is where Jewish boys learned, usually from the age of about 3. They are learning by rote the holy books of the Jewish religion. And they're learning it in what language? Okay, I mean, some of the texts are going to be in Hebrew, but they're learning it in Yiddish, in a sing-song, and then they're repeating everything. Okay, which means that that's the language that little boys are growing up with. But women, if they're sent to school at all, and many of them weren't because school was expensive, if they're sent to school at all, what language are they learning in? The local. Absolutely, absolutely. Very good. So they're learning in the local language. Now, what is this going to do as far as their chances to survive, Sasha?
If they're learning the local language, then they're able to do things like bartering. They can handle family economics. They can handle family social maneuverings and gatherings. So they're better able to provide their children. They can pass that to their children too, but they're better able to handle those type of business affairs if they needed to.
Great. Okay, and that's going to be important. And I see another hand.
I was going to say also women were better to be in the resistance because they didn't have a Yiddish accent. They also weren't circumcised.
So we're going to get to that this is the second piece of this morning. We're going to get more into that. Thank you. Your name is? Jenna. Thank you, Jenna. Yeah, absolutely. So women were able to kind of take their place in society a lot more easily than men were. And this kind of goes back to an earlier slide. This comes from Ruth Bondi, who is a survivor of Auschwitz, a specific story at a time when Germany really needed working hands. Women who had had been deported from the Theresienstadt ghetto in Czechoslovakia, outside Prague, were given the choice, actually, to show up for another selection or to stay in the camp. And a lot of them came to Ruth and asked her, what should I do? What should I do? I have children. What should I do? Should I present myself for selection? Because, you know, the thinking was, if you, in this specific case, not always, but in this specific case, if you presented yourself for selection, you had a better chance of being sent for work. And the downside was you had to leave your children behind. And you were gonna, you're gonna be condemned to death with your children. And according to Ruth Bondi, only 2 of about 600 of these young mothers in the Birkenau family camp went to this selection, and the rest just stayed with their children, even though they knew that they would be sent to the gas chambers. So that also shows you something about women's dilemmas, women's choices. And, you know, I am going to footnote this here by saying that women, if there were children, the children were kept together with the women, because this is, you know, this is the thinking. This is the thinking back in the 30s, back in the 40s. These days, we know that men make great fathers, and I mean, okay, I'm not even going to go into it. You understand what I'm saying. You understand what I'm saying? Yes, Sasha.
Were men ever like sent to camps with their children, and if so, what age? Because I know for sure women were with the really, really young and the infants, but I feel like I've read about like brothers that were in the same concentration camps, like in their young teens. So was there ever a situation where men were the caretakers in the camps and they were with their children?
From what I understand, if you're talking about young children, first of all, it's going to be very rare that they are admitted to a camp, okay, because a lot of them, you know, if you can't work for the Germans, then you have no value. Children fall into that category, children and the old being people over 50 or 55, usually. So it was very rare for children to be kept alive anyway when you're talking about camps, but the situation that you're talking about with 2 brothers who were teenagers, they would have been kept alive because they could work if they were teenagers. The children are usually put together with the women, and we'll get into that also. We'll get into that. Absolutely. Yeah, that's always the issue. Okay, are we good? So far, so good? Okay. All right, so here's where I'm going to sum it up. And this is where I think the historical research has gone. Although all Jews face the same ultimate fate along the stations toward extinction, each gender lived its own journey. And Mary Felsteiner was one of the pioneers of research into women in the Holocaust. So that's where they got to. Basically, different genders, same hell, but on the way there, it's a different story. And you'll see a lot of these, one of the great books that Stephen is giving you guys, Women in the Holocaust, you'll see a lot of these stories in those books, in that book. Highly recommended. So here we go. Somebody already said this, Tim, I believe. Nazi ideology viewed women generally as agents of fertility. Accordingly, it identified the Jewish woman as an element that must be exterminated in order to thwart the rise of future generations. Absolutely. Absolutely. So there was definitely a plan. Jewish women needed to be gotten rid of. Okay. So let's talk about, you already have seen the nuances of women in the Holocaust and how their experiences were different from men. How were their dilemmas different from men? What were their dilemmas? What are their choiceless choices? So let's talk about that. What's a mother going to do to save her children? Okay. And it's usually going to be, again, not to be too stereotypical here. And there were a lot of men, there were a lot of fathers who tried to save their children also. Absolutely. Absolutely. But this is kind of maybe a sweeping generalization, but it's going to be the mother who's going to try and save her children in most of the cases. And so I want to tell you this story. One of the strange things that I do, having done this for almost 2 decades, very scary thought, is that I try and take pictures with Holocaust survivors that I come into contact with. And the reason why I do that, anybody want to guess why I do that? Right. You continue the narrative, you show that life goes on. Okay. Mm-hmm. I like all of that. I'm actually a much more shallow person. No. I'm kidding. I take these pictures because, we're 80 years after the Holocaust. And we talk about Holocaust survivors, and 80 years is like a gulf. It's like it seems so long. And when I take pictures like this and show them to people, it's a reminder that they walked on this earth at the same time as I did. And if I'm standing here with you, then it wasn't that long ago that I took these pictures, right? A picture like this. So Rivka was a neighbor of mine. I used to see her when we were walking our dogs. And she told me, I actually went to Poland with her once with an Israeli high school. I was guiding, she was the witness. And she told me that her story. And her story was that her mother, she was the oldest, and she had twin sisters. Twin siblings. I don't remember whether they were sisters or brothers. And what Rivka's mother did to try and save her was she brought Rivka to the house of a Polish woman who would take care of her. That was the deal. Rivka never saw it that way. She never saw it as her mother was trying to save her. What Rivka remembered was watching her mother walk away. I'm going to turn around for a second just to illustrate. Watching her mother walk away, hand in hand, like this, with the twins. Do you see where I'm going here? Rivka's feeling was always that she was abandoned by her mother. But think about the sacrifice that her mother made. Gail, as you said before, how difficult it was for a mother to leave a child. And yet sometimes they felt that that was what they had to do in order to save that child. Okay, and that was what Rivka went through. But imagine her mother's hell. Yeah, absolutely. So that's just one story. Vladka Mead is an amazing story. You guys know Vladka? Okay. Vladka is terrific, and her story. She's got a lot of stories, which is the one that I want to tell you now. Her brother. She was also in the Warsaw Ghetto as a teenager. And she had a little brother, who was just about to turn 13. And her little brother, what her mother wanted to do, and again, this is the mother who is continuing the Jewish traditions. And it's important to her to continue the Jewish traditions. And what her mother does is she saves a piece of her bread every day so that she can pay someone to give Vladka's little brother lessons in bar mitzvah lessons. When you have a bar mitzvah, you go to the Torah, you read the Torah. It's something that you have to learn. And so Vladka's mother is taking a little piece of her bread every day and putting it to the side so that she'll have something to pay. Of course, we know that Vladka's mother and Vladka's brother were taken to Treblinka, and they were killed before he could have his bar mitzvah. But what Vladka says is that everybody knew where her mother was hiding the bread. Everybody knew where her mother was hiding the bread. She was hiding it in the bed, but nobody would touch it. Nobody touched it because they understood that she was hiding it for this purpose. And don't fool with Vladka's mother, right? Because she's hiding the bread for this reason. I think that we have a video, right, Stephen? I think that we have a video. But I also wanted to tell you, and even before we play the video, I wanted to tell you that Echoes does have a podcast. This is my baby, so take a listen. It's called The Human Spirit in the Holocaust, and we deal with rescue, and we deal with resilience, and we deal with resistance. And Vladka is one of our features in the podcast. And the podcast itself, it's called The Human Spirit in the Holocaust, but the episode on Vladka is called One Fierce Female, because that's what she was. She was definitely a fierce female. So that's what it looks like. You can find it on the website of Echoes and Reflections. And maybe we'll play the video. Yeah. Okay. 37, minute 37. Yeah, it's worth it to Google it. You have to just go to minute 37. No, minute 37.
Oh, minute 37. I know what that is.
There you go. There you go. 37:25 is right.
You know, I love it.
Wherever you can pull it up.
Now I'm gonna have to actually turn the distant. Let me sort of careful. Everybody like this.
This is a pain.
I love this.
No more videos, no more.
No. They're embedded in the PowerPoint. It's a little bit easier.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go turn this out back.
Will be able to disperse. And I slept over at that time in one
Yeah, I'm gonna turn this on.
Sorry, I didn't
Yeah,
know.
I'm gonna yell from the back.
Such an operation.
The technical issue.
Yeah, it should work. Everybody doing okay so far?
of the apartments of the people. It's very difficult for me to say how the lecture, what they talked, but I still remember the atmosphere, the uplift, that in the ghetto was so much starvation and the typhoid epidemic which started, and hunger and misery. We were talking about literature. And a young girl was talking to older people, and they were listening. And somehow it was the thought, the hope that this will pass. It is a time that will not remain forever. And this kind of hope was constantly in the life of the ghetto.
How did your mother hold up under these pressures?
My mother was really, today as a mother by myself, I look back, and whenever I mentioned her name, I was wondering how she was able to manage. It was a poor household, really, and nevertheless, somehow she prepared food, a meal for the children. She started selling, we didn't have already merchandise anymore, from the house, the most valuable things to be able to prepare something. She by herself didn't eat so much, and quite often I remind, she wanted very, very much that my little brother should prepare for bar mitzvah, and didn't have any possibility to pay the teacher, the religious teacher, with money. So she was cutting away her portion of bread and hiding it for us children, and this was the payment for the melamed. We knew where she was hiding, in bed, but none of us, although we were very hungry, but none of us really was thinking about taking away this. And I remember my mother, who puffed up from hunger under the ice and hiding the bread, her portion, to prepare my little brother for the bar mitzvah, which he never had. They were deported. So how my mother managed, difficult to say, how she kept her house clean, without soap, without hot water. But she did, she tried. And my mother was not the only one in the ghetto. These were the mothers trying to keep and to hold on, hoping that it will come to an end, that somehow we will survive.
Did your sister participate in the same youth organization?
No, we're before that. We're before that. We're before that. We're before that. There you go. Thank you. Okay, so you heard Vladka saying, I mean, the question was, how did your mother deal with all of this? And aside from the whole bar mitzvah story, and what she said is she remembers her mother with her eyes puffed up from hunger. She says poofed, but if you got it, it's, you know, she was taking bread away from herself in order to pay this man. But she, you know, she also says how she kept the house clean, without soap, without hot water. You know, this is what mothers were doing. These were the conditions that mothers had to deal with. And you had to keep your house clean, because if you didn't, there was lice. And lice led to typhus, and typhus was life-threatening. So for all of these reasons, I mean, she had to be looking out for her family. Okay. This is also from Vladka's book. I'm not gonna read it. But what I am gonna tell you is that Vladka, as a smuggler, basically, as a courier, and we'll talk about the couriers later, one of the things that she did was she went to a lot of women in the ghetto and tried to get them to save their children by hiding them outside the ghetto, by hiding them with poles. And Vladka went to Shmuel Ziegelboim, who was one of the leaders of the ghetto, and went to his wife, Manya, and said to her, you know, I can hide your son, Artek. I can hide him. I have a place for him. I don't have a place for you yet, but I do have a place for him. And it was, imagine this agonizing decision, because you don't know, does that mean that he'll be safe? Does that mean that will he be safe? Or it's very possible that he could die that way also. You never knew. It was really a crapshoot. You never knew when you rolled the dice. So Manya Ziegelboim, and the way Vladka puts it, and this is an excerpt from her book, which we have a piece of in Echoes, Manya said, no, I can't do it. Whatever is fated for me will also be the fate of my son. We've been through so much together, perhaps we'll succeed in surviving after all, or we'll perish together. And Vladka says, Manya Ziegelboim made a heroic decision. She did not part from her son. That's really a no judgment. I mean, to say something like that, because ordinarily maybe we would say, no, she should have given him up. He would have a better chance on the Aryan side. But this is also a heroic decision, to say, no, I'm going to take care of him. Whatever happens to me will happen to him also. So that's another Vladka story. In terms of this whole issue of men versus women, and at the beginning, this is France, right? July 16th, 1942, which is when the deportation operations begin in France, that are carried out by the French police. And there are thousands of Jews who are arrested and brought to this Veldiv. It's a velodrome in France, which was a bicycle stadium where they had bicycle races. All of the men fled. All of the men, and again, because they were under the impression that nothing would happen to the men, nothing would happen to the women and the children. It's the men that they want. So the men escape. Look at the numbers on the bottom. Of the 13,000 Jews arrested, 44% are women and 31% are children, because the men weren't there anymore. So the women and the children are arrested. And we know that what happened to these women and children is that they were held in this bicycle stadium without food, without water, really without toilets for days and days and days. It was a horrible, awful pandemonium. And from there, they were taken to Drancy, which was basically a transit camp. And from there, they're taken to Auschwitz, and 95% of them, will perish in Auschwitz. But here's a story about this woman, and I'm going to butcher her name, but Rochelle Jedinak. She was a child. This is a picture of her with her mother right here, and that's with her sister up there. She was a child. Now, here's what her mother does, okay? Because her mother understands that these are the French police that are policing the bicycle stadium. And her mother sees the opportunity for these little girls to run away. She sees that maybe one of the exits isn't guarded so closely. She's watching, she's looking. First of all, she's alert, which we have to give her a lot of credit for, because in a situation like that, you kind of lose your senses. You lose your ability to be alert and to understand what's going on. And she says to the girls, run. And they won't, because they don't want to leave her. So what does she do? Any guesses? She wants them to escape. She thinks they're going to be better off. She doesn't think she can do it, but she thinks the girls can. Okay. Okay. Possible. Sasha, nice, good guess. Yep. Also a good, that would be a good stratagem. That would be a good one. No, she does something a lot simpler. Because children, when they are faced with something like this, she hauls off and she slaps them. Imagine this mother who wants the best for her children, and the only way she has to make them let go of her, because they're hiding behind her, to make them let go of her is to haul off and slap them. And that's what they'll remember for the rest of their lives, right? And imagine the anguish of this mother who, that's her last act to protect her children is actually to slap them. I mean, it's a horrible, horrible story. It gives me chills. So that's Drancy. That's what it looked like. It was basically a housing complex on the outskirts of Paris, and 95% of those people are murdered in the Holocaust. Okay, this is from the Auschwitz album. If you guys are familiar with the Auschwitz album, it's a series of about 197 photos that were taken on the ramp at Auschwitz. It was found after the war. Really? Yeah. Did she? Yeah, I know she lived in Miami. Here being in the Orlando area. That's great. That's great. 1980. Yeah. 1980. That's great. Oh, that's good to know. Okay, now I know a little bit more about her. At any rate, she found this photo album after the war. That's a whole another story. But I want to kind of focus you on. This is the same photo. Focus you on what's going on in this photo. Okay, you've got the people from. These are Commando Canada. These are already prisoners in the camp, and their role is basically to make order on the ramp, but also to take the belongings of the Jews to the warehouses where they are, all of these goods that are stolen are basically kept. And it's called Canada, Commando Canada. And I don't know if you heard about this yesterday with 999. Yes? Okay. It's called Commando Canada because Canada was seen as this big, rich country. Yes? That's like camp slang. And of course, you see in the middle, you see it's always a doctor who performs the selections on the ramp. And remember this, we're talking about Auschwitz-Birkenau. This is the ramp at Birkenau. And there are selections performed because Auschwitz-Birkenau was a labor camp, but also a death camp. And on the ramp is where they decided who's going to live and who's going to die, right? Or who's going to, that's not really accurate. Who's going to live for a little while, suspended death sentence, and who's going to be put to death immediately. And then, of course, you see this woman who's holding the baby. And she's being sent to the side of death, immediate death. And the reason for that is because basically anyone who shows up on the ramp with a child is sentenced to death. Judy Weisenberg-Cohen, in hindsight, it is clear that in Birkenau, being a father didn't automatically sentence a man to death. But being a mother with a child, or visibly pregnant, or just holding the little hand of a child, even if the child wasn't your own, meant instant death. Okay? Women who had little children, because the whole philosophy was, perform these selections quickly, make it, process these people, and then send them to death as quickly as possible. You don't want to have any kind of scenes on the ramp. You don't want to separate mothers from their children on the ramp, because then things will get slowed down. So mothers are always going to be sent to death with their little children. And that's just the way it worked. That's just the way it worked, if it was a little child. So, just a couple of stories here, and here you can see basically the same thing, but I want you to focus. You have to have very sharp eyes. There's a group of historians who for the past 5 years have studied the Auschwitz album, because it was kind of a mystery. Why were these pictures even taken? We didn't know. We also didn't know how many trains were involved in these pictures, how many transports. And so this group of 5 historians has been studying the Auschwitz album, 3 historians, for 5 years. And if you have sharp eyes, you can pick up a lot of interesting things. For instance, I want you to take a look at what's going on here. And what's going on there, looks to me, and these are not my sharp eyes, this is a friend who picked this up. What does it look like to you guys? Can't tell. Okay, fair enough. Here's a little bit of a bigger. Reassuring. Okay, could be reassuring. Could also be taking the child. Okay, trying to stay together, could be. Okay, could be all of these things. We will never know exactly what's going on there, but let me tell you a story that's very much like it. There's a survivor whose name is Cecily Klein Pollock, and she gave testimony to USHMM. And Cecily is talking about the moment that she arrived at Birkenau, on the ramp at Birkenau, in the train. And she says, my mother, whose name was Rosa, that was her mother's name, my mother had the presence of mind to ask these people in the striped uniforms from Commando Canada, what's going on here? It might have been her mother, or it might have been her father. At any rate, these guys are not supposed to say. So somebody slips them a watch. And one of these guys says, look, within a couple of hours, all the children and all the old people will be killed. Everybody else is going to be put to work. Okay? And so what Rosa does is she jumps off the train, because she has, aside from Cecily, she has another daughter whose name is Mina, and Mina has a son named Danny. She jumps off the train and she says to Mina, who's holding Danny, she says, Mina, darling, I just heard that what's going to happen to me is I'm going to really have to work very hard here. They're going to make me work, it's forced labor, they're going to make me work very hard, but anybody who has a child is going to be allowed to take care of that child. So give Danny to me, and I'll take care of Danny. Okay, Sasha got it. I'll take care of Danny, and we'll see each other at the end of the day, when you finish working. What's she doing? She's saving her daughter at the expense of? At the expense of her own life. At the expense of her own life. She's taking Danny, and that's a death sentence, right? And she gets that. She's taking Danny from her daughter, saving her daughter's life by ending her own life. And I'm reading Cecily Klein Pollock's memoirs, and it's her brother-in-law. And I come across this photo, again from the Auschwitz album, and this is Rosa and Danny. A couple of minutes probably after that whole decision was made. So that picture that we saw before looks to me like what's happening on the ramp in that picture is that the mother is trying to take the baby. Could be, there's a very famous rock musician in Israel whose name is Yehuda Poliker, if anybody has ever heard of him. And Yehuda Poliker, his family went to Auschwitz. His father, who was married to a different woman. They had a baby at the time. And his father remembers, that he gave the baby to his mother because the baby was crying. In a scene like this, a baby is crying, a baby is screaming. You want to calm them down, the mother will take the child, right? That's pretty natural. The mother will take the child, and that was her death sentence. all of a sudden he kind of didn't know exactly what happened to the baby anymore. So there are a lot of stories on the ramp, and there are also stories like this. I'm going to read this whole thing because I think it's important. This is Judith Rubinstein. I was standing huddled with my mother and little brother when along came a high-ranking SS officer who, we later found out, was the infamous Dr. Mengele. He started the selection among the women. It was noticed that Mengele was separating the women who looked 45 or older and the mothers with children, sending them to one side and the young and healthy-looking girls and women to the other side, filed 5 in a row. It must have been a maternal instinct that inspired my mother to do what she did next. In front of us were standing 4 tall, good-looking girls. We knew them from the ghetto, and they were holding the hands of their 3 little nieces and 1 nephew, whose parents were hiding in Budapest. My mother pulled these children to her side and pushed me to be the 5th in the row with the 4 young women. I will take care of the children, she told them, and you will take care of Judith, meaning me. I started to protest and turned around to go back to her, but within a minute she disappeared with the 4 children. That was the last time I saw my mother. I often wondered how she knew she would save my life by separating me from herself and the children. It gives me sleepless nights even today when I think of the agony she must have suffered before she was killed with the children and thousands of others. I am forever grateful for the gift of life she gave me. The pains of losing her so young will never leave me. May her memory be blessed always. These are hard stories to tell, and they're very hard to listen to. I know, I apologize for that. They're very hard. But this is what's happening. This is what's going on with mothers on the ramp at Birkenau. This is what's happening, and this is why the nuances of studying women in the Holocaust and their experiences, it's different. It's different than what the men went through. It's very different. Yeah, please, Deanna. No, not Deanna. Sarah.
I think sometimes it might also seem so hard for us to process because we can't imagine what we would do or how we would feel. So it's like sometimes we want to look at things from our perspective, like the mother who had to slap her daughters to get them to go. Like, that's the desperation. That's the harsh reality. She knew what she had to do. Because, I mean, in a sense, you have to imagine that they're trauma bonded. They're not going to leave her. And she has to do that for them. So it's like, we can't even imagine that. Like, we want to say, oh, coax them away. Oh, like, convince them to go. They're not going to go, you know?
Yep. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, it's hard stuff. It's very hard stuff. But, you know, these are the dilemmas. These are the dilemmas that women were facing, that especially women as mothers were facing. Esther Goldstein, okay, the Eichmann trial, just a little bit of context for you, 1960, Adolf Eichmann is caught by the Israeli Mossad, the Secret Service, in Argentina, where he had escaped after the war. Who was Adolf Eichmann? He was basically the guiding hand behind the logistics of the final solution. I mean, that's a shorthand way of putting it. He starts off in Austria, getting the Jews to emigrate and then stripping them of their property, and he becomes like an expert in Jewish affairs and the logistics of sending them to the death camps. He's brought to Israel and he's tried. This is Jerusalem, 1960, at a time when Israeli society had not yet really dealt with this whole issue of how did the survivors live to tell their stories, what were their stories. There was a lot of angst still, and this is the big departure point because at this trial, 110 witnesses come forward and tell their individual stories. And because it's first person, it's this happened to me, and because they had names and faces, the whole situation begins to change. People start to listen to survivors. Survivors become holy in the minds of a lot of people. So this is Esther Goldstein. Esther Goldstein is telling the story of what happened to her at Birkenau. And this is Esther. You can see her in the middle here, again, with a picture from the Auschwitz album. Esther is in the middle, and 2 of her 3 sisters are flanking her. Esther got to Birkenau with her 3 sisters, so there were 4 of them. And her older sister, Piri, has 2 children. She's got Dina, Dina, who's 13 months old, who she's holding, she's a baby, and Ellie, who is a 5-year-old boy. Okay, now Ellie is very nervous, and what do little boys or little children do when they're nervous and they need their mommy? Yeah, they're loud, they're crying, he's hiding behind her skirts, he's holding onto her legs. And the German who's on the ramp comes over and says to her, give the children give the children to one of the older women. Sometimes they did that. And Peary said, I won't give them up. They're mine. They're my children. And so the German, and this is kind of a real extraordinary event, brings over a translator because he figures maybe she doesn't understand. And he translates into Yiddish for her, give the children to one of the older people. And she says, no, I won't do it. They're mine. I'm not giving them away. And ultimately, and this is also extraordinary, the German takes the children. And what Esther testified, and you can see her face on the stand, right? This is from the trial testimony. What she, and you could also see it from her body language all throughout the time that she was testifying. I have the clip, but I'm not going to ask Steve to put it up. Well, maybe we'll save that for a different clip. But you can see from my notes, I mean, she's licking her lips, she's rubbing her hands together, she's nervous, and what she tells the prosecutors and the defense is that basically she and her other two sisters had to keep Peary. The entire time that they were at Birkenau, she had to keep her from running to the electrified fence. Because after her children were taken from her, she wanted to kill herself. And they had to watch her the entire time. So that's Esther's story. Okay, this clip I am going to ask Steve to put up because, yeah, that's the first one. That's the very first one. This is Itka Zygmuntowicz, who appears a couple of times in Echoes and Reflections. She's a she gives a lot of great testimony. She talks about writing poetry in her head at Auschwitz, which is like incredible resistance. She talks about a lot of different things, but I want you to hear her story about the ramp at Birkenau also. So, please.
Was there ever any photographs, or was it just the people testifying? So, like, was there any actual video or photographic documentation of what it looked like versus 10 years later when they're sitting there testifying? Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
No video documentation. At this point, because that trial was held in 1961, it's before the Auschwitz album really made its appearance. But there were drawings that were submitted as evidence by people who had been there, and they were submitted into evidence. Yeah.
Like when you see someone 10, 12 years later and they're healthy and they look like, was it hard for people to believe these people that were testifying if there wasn't any photographic proof of what it actually, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's a really interesting question. I think that by the time the Eichmann trial took place in Israel, people were ready to hear the stories. And so they didn't need to see those photographs, if you will, the before pictures. They didn't need to see that. It was very obvious, like you saw the picture of Esther on the stand, it was very obvious how hard it was for these witnesses to tell their stories. So they believed it without having the need to see it before. Yeah, does that pretty much answer? Okay. So this is Itka. She's got a very thick, beautiful Polish accent. Anything that you don't understand, I'll explain to you afterwards. And this is her moment at Birkenau.
They took away my little brother Solek, my little sister Zisel. My mother and I were sent to decide to go to the camp. And when my mother saw that they took away my brother and sister, she turned to me and she said, Yitkolo, you're a big girl. I have to go with the little children. I can't leave them alone. But remember, my child, no matter what will happen to you, don't become bitter and hateful. Don't let them destroy you. It was the last time I saw my family.
You guys got it? I'm sorry. I'm sorry to do this to you. It's like, it's very hard to listen to this stuff. But that's, those were the choices that women had. And that's my point. These are the dilemmas that women had during the Holocaust. These were the dilemmas that they faced. And they were unlike anything else. I mean, this is a dilemma from hell. God forbid anybody should ever be in a position like that. So, just in terms of what women were facing. Okay. I want to, can we go back to the PowerPoint, Stephen? Oh, we're on it. Oh, great. Then it's up to me. You're one step ahead of me. All right. Excellent. Okay. So from all of these camp dilemmas, how did women deal with hunger in the ghettos and the camps? And we've got 15 minutes left in this first session. And one of the things, one of the pedagogical principles that we really do believe in at Echoes is that it can't all be about this horror, this terror, it can't all be, you don't want to leave your students, when you're teaching them about the Holocaust, you don't want to leave them at this low point. You don't want them to leave your classroom thinking, oh my God, what a horrible, you don't want them to be traumatized. You don't want to teach them about the trauma by traumatizing them. So one of the things that we always say is, safely in, safely out. Has anybody ever heard that before? Okay. So we always say safely in, safely out. That comes from Yad Vashem's pedagogical philosophy. So what I'm thinking here is you've heard enough horror. I could tell you more stories because in the ghettos and the camps, we're dealing with hunger. Hunger was a very difficult thing to deal with. Maybe I'll tell you a couple of stories and then I'll save a little time to give you a safely out so that you don't walk out of here with your jaws on the floor, okay? So let's do that. Food is definitely going to be the traditional responsibility of women. Women are the ones usually who are going to be feeding their children, their families. Some of the grimmest phenomena is the severe hunger, and it's the partner of disease because they claimed more victims' lives than anything else in the ghettos. So this is a picture. Speaking of a staged picture, this is a staged picture that was taken by, I believe it's the AJC or the JDC, one of the committees that was responsible for getting money to Jews in the ghettos. One of the Jewish committees, Jewish organizations, that was responsible for doing that at least until the Great Deportation in July of 1942. So this is the Warsaw Ghetto. And this is a picture from Lodz that I have paired with testimony from Joseph Zelikovic in Those Terrible Days, which is a very difficult book. This is what's going on in Lodz. And you can see the lists that are posted every day with the rations, right? She, the mother, has to join the bread queue at 6 a.m. The dairy cooperatives open at 8, and she must take her place in line there, too, in order to obtain a quarter of a liter of milk for her little child. After that, she scurries from house to house to sell the milk to those with means for 3 pfennigs in order to redeem the vouchers for soup at the public kitchens. Later, she must run from neighbor to neighbor in order to prepare a pot of food. When everything is ready, she stands at the gas burner for hours on end, blowing on the fire so that the soup in the pot will boil. In the meantime, night has fallen. These are the extreme measures that women had to take to get food for their families. Another type of this is also from Lodz. The moment the mother stepped into the house, the children leaped upon her bag. She's got potato peels. Potato peels were a huge luxury in the ghetto, huge. People went through garbage in order to get them. People dug in the ground in the garbage in order to get them. So this mother has brought back potato peels. Now it's time to work. They dumped the peels into a bucket, went down to the spigot in the freezing yard, selected the peels that was suitable for use, washed and cleaned them. At dusk, the tired children began to fall asleep in the middle of their work, but they had to continue. After the peels were washed, water was boiled in order to clean off the last bits of dirt. It was now midnight, and the housewife herself was spent. The 2 kilograms of peels have shriveled to a half a kilo, sorry. And now she's got the meat grinder. She's got to grind them as if they were meat. She's decided to prepare dumplings for the soup. According to doctors, logical people, and gastronomy experts in the ghetto, these things have nutritional value. Therefore, it'd be a crime to forego such a gift, despite the monumental toil that it takes to achieve results. So you understand what's going on here. And bear in mind, these women don't have stoves the way we know stoves. They don't have gas burners. They can't just turn it on, turn it off. In order to cook things, they actually have to start a fire. And what are they going to start a fire with? A lot of times it's going to be wood that they chop up their furniture. They chop up the door to the house. They chop up the stairs. They chop up the banisters on the stairwells, okay? All of these things, this is how they have to, this is actually, otherwise they can't cook. So you understand what's happening here. This is the last thing I'll show you, and then we'll go to the safely out, okay? So you take a look at this picture. This is a picture taken by Mendel Grossman, who was a photographer in the Lodz ghetto. And these are actually, that's his brother-in-law in the photo, and his nephew, whose name was Yankush. First of all, what's strange about this picture? Okay, the angle that it's, okay. All right, Marty. This is in the ghetto. Mendel Grossman was an official photographer in the ghetto. I should explain how he was able to take pictures. And he took pictures for the German government in the ghetto, but he also used his camera to document his family, basically, dying of hunger, and to document a lot of other things. Betsy. Okay, looks like there's substance to the soup, probably like the type of dumplings that we just heard about. Yep. Okay. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Amy. There you go. And why are they wearing winter clothing at the table? Because it's cold. Think about that for a second. If you have chopped up your furniture and you have chopped up, remember that in the ghetto in Lodz, it's not like they had bathrooms and running water. In order to go to the bathroom, they had to go to the outhouse. They had to go down the stairs and to the outhouse. The outhouse has a wooden door on it. If you chop up that wooden door, not only don't you have any privacy, but it's also freezing cold. And they don't have anything to heat their houses with, because all of that stuff is under the control of the Germans. And the Germans aren't giving them coal to heat their houses with. So it's freezing cold and they're wearing their winter clothes. Okay. So you just heard how difficult it was to make soup. How difficult it is for women in the ghetto to make soup. First, they've got to turn the potato peels into dumplings. They've got to grind them. They've got to wash them. Then they have to actually make a fire in order to cook them, and they have to stand there fanning the fire for hours and hours and hours. Why would a housewife decide to make soup? Why would a mother decide to make soup? Please, yeah. Definitely. You add a little water, you stretch it a little bit more, for sure. That's a good reason to make soup. But I want you guys to think out of the box. Think out of the box a little bit. Yeah. Keeps them warm, sure. Thanks, Jenna. Keeps them warm. Yep. Mitch? Takes longer to eat, meaning? So that you feel more full. Okay. Sasha? Okay. You guys are all very logical, and all of your answers are right. I mean, all of your answers are right. But there's another. Tim, you got a shot? Okay, there you go. It's as basic as that. Sarah, you want to add something? Comfort food, right. Because it's warm and because it's, and it keeps you full. The water volume. Mitch, you want to add?
Just one more thing, eating with a spoon is civilized.
Okay, eating with a spoon is civilized as opposed to eating with your hands. Yep. But the whole issue of why would you go to such lengths to prepare soup?
I've got a couple people online.
Yeah.
I just want so they can give it to little children and babies, possibly easier to
Okay.
feed them, give them nourishment. But also can reduce the need to go to the number 2, the restroom a little bit if you don't have access to bathrooms. It's comforting, and of course, like was said, almost anything can be made into soup.
Right. All correct answers, but I'm going to go with Tim here. What this woman is trying to do by making soup is she's trying to keep her family together. She's trying to remember that one of the biggest problems with hunger is that it destroys the family. And I should have put in a couple of slides in here about the people whose children took food out of their parents' mouths, the parents who took food out of their children's mouths. Even within the family, there's competition for food. And that's what makes the family disintegrate, because when there's competition for food, all of those beautiful relationships, those familial relationships, the love, the support, the I have your back, it disappears because hunger, God forbid any of us should know hunger like that. Hunger is something that makes you do things that you ordinarily wouldn't do. And so in a situation like this woman has created a situation where her family is still sitting down together to eat. They're still being civil towards each other. They're eating with spoons, which is a mark of, of civility. But they are sitting together. They are not competing for food. She's trying to keep the family together, and I think that's really what's going on here. So thank you all for your input. And I am going to skip ahead many slides. That's more Vladka. Vladka also, by the way, wait, let me go back for a second. Nope. Let me go back for a second. In this whole issue of what mothers did and how they kept their families together, this is one of the PDFs that we have in Echoes. I see that you're all already reading it. And it comes from her testimony. And she says, the question was, because we talk about armed resistance in the ghettos. And Vladka's belief was that there couldn't have been any armed resistance if the Jews hadn't remembered their dignity. And she says, when I look back, I think the armed resistance was possible because there was an ethical, moral resistance going on in the ghetto before deportation. It's a chain. It didn't come suddenly. The young people in the underground came from the houses of the parents who were transported to the gas chambers, but the houses were full of beliefs, of hope, of believing in humanity, in justice, and this was a chain leading to active resistance. And that is why I can't separate the uprising or active resistance or the partisan resistance from the resistance which took place in the quiet so-called times in the ghetto. For instance, the mothers that she was talking about before. This was the base, the foundation. It was a chain of resistance in our Jewish lives which culminated in armed resistance, which is pretty interesting. If they hadn't kept their dignity somehow, kept their morals and values somehow, they never could have staged the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. So, okay, Echoes. We've got a lot of, a lot of slides here. I want to get to the safely out. So I'm skipping all of this stuff. I apologize for that. But we could go on and on and on telling these very, very sad stories. Yeah, can you? All right. Oh, that's much. Whoop. So the safely out that I want to give you is women in resistance. Okay, and we'll talk about the careers. You can wait, go back. Yeah, the orange one is great. Okay. So just some stories of women in resistance. I want to tell you one particular story because my next session, which will start after your break, my next session is really a whole session about women in resistance. So just one story that's not included in that session that I want to tell you for now. And this is, when you think about resistance, this is Fritzi Frischall, who was she was an executive director in the Skokie, Illinois Holocaust Museum for a long time, and Fritzi was a survivor of Auschwitz. She was a child when she was taken to Auschwitz, and we think of resistance, a lot of times we think of resistance kind of by different measures, but what Fritzi is telling us here is how women resisted and how they helped each other. If one had gray hair, they would take a piece of coal and rub it on their head so it wouldn't show gray and make them look younger. Why? Why are they trying to make them look younger? Okay, exactly, because the older ones are sent directly to death because they have no value as workers. That was resistance. After work, if one couldn't make it back into the camp, holding each other up, that was resistance. Sharing food was resistance. A man helping me by telling me when we first came into Auschwitz, when you get off this train, you are 15, that was resistance. That was his way of trying to save a child's life. And you know that this is, anybody teach night? Okay, so you know that that's Elie Wiesel's story also. That's how he was saved when he got off the ramp, when he got off the cattle car onto the ramp at Birkenau. But that's not even the story that I wanted to tell you, and neither is this one, and this one you'll see next. It's this one, okay? In 2 minutes. You know that Auschwitz-Birkenau is one of how many? One of the three camps in which there were armed uprisings. Okay, but the uprisings were never carried out by anyone except the Jews at Auschwitz-Birkenau. There was an international underground at Auschwitz with a resistance, and the Jews were always saying, you know, help us here. We gotta stage some kind of something. And they were unwilling to do it. And it was not until the Sonderkommando, who by and large were Jewish prisoners, whose responsibility it was to make sure that the people got into the gas chambers, right? They were the very, very unfortunate prisoners whose job it was to kind of facilitate the whole process of murder. They were not the murderers because the Germans always poured the Zyklon B, which was the poison gas that was used at Birkenau to kill these people. That was the function of the Germans. But the Sonderkommando, which means special command, special work detail in German, they were the ones who really were the last who saw these people, were the people who guided the victims into the gas chambers, and later, after they were gassed, took the bodies and cremated them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Very, very unfortunate people. And they understood, you know, they were the keepers, the bearers of the secrets, Geheimnichtsträger in German. And they knew that the Germans every now and then would kill them off, because they were the bearers of the secrets, because they knew what was going on there. So the Germans periodically would kill them off and would bring in a new group of Sonderkommando. And so they were the ones who decided, we have to fight back. We have to have an uprising. Now, how are they going to fight back against the Germans? This is impossible, right? It's impossible. They have no weapons. They're not going to use their bare hands. And so what they do is there's a kind of a collaboration that comes up between the Sonderkommando and a group of women who worked in a factory called the Unionwerke factory, and these women made arms. And so there was a group of women who worked in the gunpowder room, and they had access to gunpowder. Now, it's not going to be very easy to smuggle out gunpowder because they're going to be, I'm going to conclude, and I'm wrapping it up. Okay, yep. I see you standing though, Stephen, I see you standing. Anyway, these women had access to gunpowder. They were searched every time they went to the bathroom. They were searched every time they left the facility. But what they decided to do was they decided they were going to smuggle in the gunpowder, and they were going to get it to the Sonderkommando. And they smuggled it in their kerchiefs that they wore on their heads, in their ear canals, under their arms, in their bras, in their shoes, if they had bras. Everywhere that they could possibly think of. We know that there were at least 30 of them. Many of them, we will never know their names because it went from hand to hand to hand to hand. And they were all conspirators in this plot to do this. By the way, there is a movie that came out about this whole story called Sabotage. And I know that it played at a film festival here in Florida, at least in the last year or so. But we also have a podcast about this called...
Is anyone familiar with this story? Never.
No?
No, wait. This is their pre-work. Before they came here, they had to listen to the podcast.
Oh, that's good to know. Okay.
Everyone's like, they're going, what? I've never heard of this before.
Okay, that's
great.
great.
Do the pre-work, you didn't know about this.
That's great. At any event, I will say these are the 4 women who were taken. They were interrogated. They were beaten. They did not divulge any of the other names. They kept that secret. Without these 4 women, there would have been no uprising at Auschwitz-Birkenau, and it's the only uprising that ever happened there. So in terms of a safely out story and resistance of women, armed resistance of women in the Holocaust, this is one of the best ones there is. And with that, I'm going to conclude this session. You guys are entitled to a break, and I'm going to get something to drink, and we'll meet up at...
Do 10 minutes? We're going to do a 10-minute break. Everyone who's online, we're going to join the next sessions. We're going to bump you out so we can end this and set this recording up, and we'll be all ready. Thank you all so much. Take 10 minutes.